Hello and welcome to this session on buying and selling a business. My name is Renée Gendron. I'm the lead regional coordinator for PARO. PARO is a nonprofit organization that supports women entrepreneurs throughout Canada from ideation to export. Among our services are training camps, biz camps to help you scale and grow your business. And in Ontario, we are the sole mechanism to access the WEOC loan, which is a loan of up to $50,000 to start a business or expand your business, or in this case, buy or sell your business. We offer a lot more services that I can squeeze into a minute. So please feel free to reach out and ask how we can best support you. Today, we have the privilege of being joined by Jessica Craig. She works with the International Business Brokers Association. She's located in British Columbia. And what the format of this session is, Jessica and I will have a chat about some common issues about buying and selling a business. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. We'll need to keep the Q&A session a little bit more generic as opposed to specifics because she can't really comment on a specific business transaction or deal. Jessica, thank you so much for your time this morning and this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. As Renée said, I'm in BC, so it's about 9 a.m. here for me, but good afternoon to most of you on the eastern side. As Renée mentioned, I volunteer with the International Business Brokers Association of Canada. We represent brokers across the country, so we offer tools and resources for them. We run a conference and support them throughout their business brokerage profession. And we all work at various firms across the country. So if you're looking for someone in Ontario or Alberta or anywhere, it's likely that I will know somebody that is local to you. But most of us work all over. So there's options for everybody.
Wonderful, thank you. And could you just give us a few highlights as to how you got involved as a business broker?
Yeah, for sure. So I did my education out here in BC, and I went into finance working in banking. And I was always interested in succession. You know, you hear a lot about this tsunami of people retiring, and I was just very curious about what was going to happen with that. How do you value those businesses, and how do you help those people realize that legacy that they've built? So that's kind of what got me interested in it. And then in working at the bank, I found people who were trying to buy and sell companies, and I didn't really know how to support them. So I ended up finding this role. I work with Pacific Mergers and Acquisitions here in BC, and I was able to get my CBI and learn about how to actually help clients sell their companies. And that's kind of how I kind of fell into it.
Wonderful, thank you. So we'll start with the selling part of a business. So what are buyers looking for when they're buying a business?
Most buyers are looking at every acquisition as an investment. So you want to think about your business as an investment for them. How can they invest in the company and then see a return on that investment? And then they're also looking for things that are running efficiently, that have staff, that have policies and procedures that are well laid out for them to follow so that they can immediately start making a return on that investment. That's really what they're looking for. I think the biggest thing, depending on the size of your company, that can come into play when buyers are looking at it is how much you do in the company and how involved you are as the owner, and how easily it would be for them to step in and take over for you.
And so I just want to unpack that. So would most buyers be taking over the role of the seller, or are they not a turnkey solution, walk away?
No. So good question. It's both, but it really depends on the size of the company, what sort of buyer you're going to attract. A smaller company with an owner operator is most likely going to attract other owner operators. So people who are looking to become an entrepreneur through an acquisition, and they want to really be in there and run this company. Most of the buyers that you look at from the larger side are going to be purely investors. They want turnkey operations. They want management in place. And the more heavily involved the owner is, the harder it's going to be to sell that business.
Thank you for that. So, what can a seller do to prepare her business for sale?
The big things that you can focus on at any time is making sure that you have your documentation in place. So when you're getting ready to sell, um, making sure that you have your financial documents, that you understand what's going on with your finances, and having contracts, policy and procedure manuals, all sorts of documentation. Um, those are the things that will help someone come in and run the business effectively.
And so that's interesting. I'm just wondering here, so how far in advance should somebody be preparing for a sale of a business?
So depending on where you're at in your business, starting right away, you can prepare some of those documents, right? You can try to keep policy and procedure manuals going. You can try to have a handle on your finances at any point in running your company. It doesn't necessarily have to be before you are ready to sell. And those are things that will help you in the long term anyway. So starting, in my opinion, as early as possible is the best way to do it. But if you're already running your business and you're, just thinking now, but that you want to sell and you're like, how soon do I really need to focus on the actual exit planning? I would say about 2 to 5 years.
Okay, so that's an average lead time from the decision I'm going to sell my business, your horizon to find a bot, well, to position yourself well.
To position yourself well, yes,
Yeah.
you could sell faster than that, absolutely. But if you really want to focus on the exit planning and building your business to a point where it is where you want it, 2 to 5 years is a good amount of lead time, especially when you're talking about things like tax strategy. There are certain strategies that you can use when you sell your business in Canada to make use of the capital gains exemption and different things like that. And usually you will need 2 years to make sure that your business qualifies for that, if for whatever reason it doesn't qualify.
Okay. And I'm just going to back up a little bit in terms of documentation. So you said policies and procedures, right? So how do you actually make what you make?
Mhm.
Would it be good practice to also have accurate client records with associated contracts?
Absolutely. Contract.
Any contracts with vendors or suppliers that you
Yeah.
need? What are the terms? What's being expired? Um, Minute things and important things. I'm just thinking here. The equipment that you buy, the servicing of the equipment that you need to do what you do, warranty papers for
Yeah.
those equipments, right? And then any kind of certifications that you need. So if you're in the food business, for example, you need food handling certifications for your staff. So keeping track of those records as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay,
Um,
wonderful.
Most times when buyers are coming in to look at your business, they're going to ask for all of those things. And my job is to help you be able to show them as much as possible while keeping confidential information safe, right? You don't necessarily want to give out a customer list, but you want to know what your terms are with your customers and those sorts of things so you can show them to a prospective buyer.
Okay, and I'm going to ask because we're talking about disclosure. So your intellectual property. If you have any IP, patents, copyrights, trade secrets, that sort of thing, that would also need to be protected before, correct?
Yes. And as you go through the
Okay.
process of selling your business, depending on who you're working with, there are ways of protecting that information. So most of the brokers through IBBA or someone like myself, we hold all of the information in a secure data room, and everyone that gets access to that has signed a non-disclosure, non-interference agreement. So
Wonderful.
we protect that information for you. But if you're trying to sell your business yourself, that's something to keep in mind. Have a non-disclosure agreement, have something written up before you give that information to a prospective buyer.
And file for your patents and file for your copyrights before and accept. Okay, excellent. So how do I know the value of my business other than sweat equity and pure heart?
Yes. Unfortunately, when buyers are looking at your business, they don't see that as an investment opportunity. What they're looking at is financials most of the time. So the value of your business is going to come from those earnings, right? And as a business owner, we put a lot of time and effort into building and running our businesses, and we want to get the best value for it. And the best way to do that is to show your earnings on the bottom line. So you want to build a profitable company, and then the other pieces will help you add to that value. So those contracts, recurring revenue, things like having membership base, those are things that can add to the value, but the real value is going to stem from the earnings. Business valuations are done with many different methodologies, and you'll most likely hear of something called a multiple. It's when they look at your bottom line or your EBITDA or your SDE, and they multiply that by something, and that's how they find the value.
For someone who's not familiar with those terms, you said SDE and you said something else. What do those terms mean?
EBITDA, so that's your earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. And that's where you take your net income and you add back in each of those things. You add back in your taxes, depreciation, amortization, and interest, because those are non-cash items usually. Or interest is depending on your specific position, right? A buyer might not have that. The other one is seller's discretionary earnings. And that's where you take your EBITDA and you add back in one owner's fair market salary. Most small businesses, so I'm trying to give an example of what that would be. I would say maybe under $1 million are going to be based on an SDE basis.
Okay. Is that someone, like, is a regular accountant able to help the business owner, or do they need to go to a specialist accountant with this kind of particular knowledge?
Lots of accountants can do valuations. When you're getting a valuation done, it's important to find one that is specifically for the purpose that you're looking for, because you could get a valuation for tax purposes, or if there's, a marriage agreement, something like that, you could use an accountant or something like that for one of those. If you're specifically looking to go to market, I would find a valuator that is going to give you a valuation for the purpose of going to market.
And an evaluator like that could be found through the International Business Brokers Association?
Absolutely. Most of our brokers will either outsource our valuations for you, or we'll do them in-house. Through the IBBA, we're trained to do valuations, so we can at least help you get a ballpark. And then if you need a more detailed valuation, we'll either do that in-house like our firm does, or they can outsource it to someone else. But most of them will at least be able to give you a very clear idea of what it will look like.
Okay, so we're going to just talk about semantics here, but it's very important that we understand the difference between the value of my business versus the worth of my business. And I was wondering if you could just chat a little bit about those differences.
Value for what I do, value is going to equate eventually to the purchase price. That is on the open market, what someone is willing to pay for your business, right? That's what we think of when we think of the value. The worth for you might be completely different from that, right? Same thing if you're thinking about a house or something like that. You might put your house on the market for $1 million and eventually it only sells for 800,000. I don't know. I live in BC. Numbers are crazy. But it's a similar idea when you value your company, right? We can go through all our methodologies and say, okay, we think it's going to be worth this much, but eventually, at the end of the day, it's worth what the market will pay for it, whether we can push that up above the value or whether we have to bring it down to find the right buyer.
Thank you. Thank you. So you mentioned that the IBBA can help you sell your business. And what's the most important part of a business sale? So what advisors can help you through that process from the decision to sell and that 2 to 5 year horizon sold?
Yeah, so there's lots of different people that can help you along the way. There are exit planning advisors, and they can help you increase the value of your business or help you create a strategy, especially if you're nearing retirement age and you need, trust accounts or things like that. You'll want a tax planning advisor, and they can help you set yourself up for when the business is actually sold. So what do you do with those funds after? Are they going to go to your children? What does that look like? So exit planning advisors and tax planning advisors for that kind of lead up period. Once you're ready to sell, someone like myself, we help in the valuation portion as well as finding the buyer and negotiating the sale. So we will market the business and help you find someone that is a fit to actually purchase it. If you have, sometimes you might have employees or something like that want to purchase, then you don't necessarily need someone to go out and find the right buyer, but you could probably still use support in the other ways. What is it worth? How do I share that information with the employees? Those sorts of things. So that's where M&A advisors or business brokers like myself come in. The other people that you really want to have on your team are your accountant and your lawyer. Most people, when they run their business, they have an accountant and a lawyer that they've been working with for years and years and years, which is great. You probably have a strong relationship with them and you feel comfortable asking them questions. Make sure you ask them if they've done a transition before, because if they haven't, you're better off to find a new lawyer or accountant that has done it to make sure that you get the right support. I've seen it happen multiple times where people have this great relationship with their lawyer, but then the lawyer ends up, not acting in the best interest of the client and basically ending like killing the deal because it's different than what they normally do. So when you're finding a lawyer and accountant to help you with the sale, make sure that they have done it before.
Excellent advice. Now, you've talked about technical support for accounting, technical support for legal frameworks, an exit strategy. Now, we're dealing with a lot of owners who put a lot of heart and a lot of sweat equity into building those businesses over years, perhaps decades. What kind of emotional or psychological support would you suggest for someone who has to let go of her baby? And the baby's not even off to university, like the baby's just gone, right?
Yeah, the baby is gone. It belongs to someone else.
Yeah.
And I know that can be really hard. And a lot of advisors like myself, that's part of our role to help you through that, to help talk you through those moments where you're worried about what's going to happen to it or those types of things, right? That's a lot of what we do, that emotional support, because it's a very emotional process, or it can be selling your business. So at least personally, I offer a lot of that support to my clients. The other people you could look to are coaches, and people who, especially there's coaches who help out with like retirement and after you're kind of done working in this business, what to do next. Those are good types of coaches to have because you might feel a little bit lost. You've probably spent 40, probably more hours a week in this business for a very long time. And oftentimes my sellers, they get very disoriented when they don't have that anymore. So having someone to coach you through what to do next can be helpful. But also making sure that your advisor, your business broker, someone like that is someone that you feel comfortable enough talking to about those things.
Okay, thank you. So what documents are required for selling a business?
It definitely depends on the size and complexity of the business that you're in. So if you are at the type of business that has a lot of regulatory requirements, you're going to need all of those documents. You're going to need to make sure that everything is in place for the buyer to take over. And if they need to have any regulatory requirements, then they can pass over because they have the right education or whatever, like a pharmacy would be something like that, right? The business that is being sold has all the documentation that they need, but the buyer has to be a pharmacist, right? So there's certain things like that you might need depending on the type of business. But in a general sense, you will always need a share purchase agreement. And that is something that your lawyer can draft up and they will help you, or well, the buyer's lawyer will usually draft it and the seller's lawyer will go through and then they'll go back and forth on it until you get to the final agreement. That's the biggest one. If you're selling assets instead of shares, you would have an asset purchase agreement, but same thing. There's that one main purchase agreement. That's the most important document for selling.
Is there a preference? Years ago, I heard that buyers want the assets and sellers want to sell the shares. And is this still a little conflict as to what they want? Could you just speak a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. Yes, that is definitely still a thing. The main sale that we see in Canada is a share sale. This would be different in the US. They see mainly asset sales. But in Canada, we have the capital gains exemption, and shares of a small business typically qualify for that. So sellers usually want to take advantage of the capital gains exemption and sell their shares. That way, a lot of that money can be tax-free. That's why most sellers want to do a share sale. Buyers, on the other hand, when you transfer the shares of the business, you take on the liability that belongs to those shares. So most buyers would prefer to only buy the assets. That way they don't take on any liability. Anything, if there was some sort of litigation or something against your company and they only bought the assets, that litigation would come back to you because you still own that company.
All right. And so you're saying not taking on the liability. My little follow-up question to that is, if your business is in debt
Mhm.
and you want to sell, what would that scenario look like?
Most of the time, businesses are transacted on a cash-free, debt-free basis. So if you have a lot of debt, what's going to happen most of the time is that the proceeds of the sale are going to have to be used to pay off that debt.
Okay. And that's just part of the agreement that the buyer only buys if the debt is cleared with. Okay.
Yes, typically. Sometimes in certain situations, and I think you would see this more with asset heavy companies. There's a lot of equipment, that sort of stuff involved. They will transfer the debt and they'll be able to leverage the debt like a larger organization will buy a small organization that has a lot of debt so that they can leverage it. But that's less likely for your run-of-the-mill small company. You're most likely going to have to pay off all that debt.
Thank you. And we've got proud PARO women across the country. They have brilliant businesses. What should they do if someone reaches out to them and they want to buy the company?
Just a great question. I love when that happens and it works out because it can be really exciting, right? You might not have thought about selling your business before and somebody's called you out of the blue and they want to know about it and they might be willing to buy it. I've seen it work out well, and I've also seen it work out not so well. You just want to make sure when that happens that you're careful with the information that you provide. You get them to sign an NDA sometimes if they're asking for too much, like very confidential information, and you want to make sure that they're serious, right? They're not just competitors that are fishing for information, or they're not going to, give you a very low offer when your business is actually worth quite a bit more. So in those situations, when you're having those conversations, it can be helpful to have a valuation done just so that you have a benchmark, right? You might be willing to take a little bit more or less than that value, but at least you have an idea of where you think you should stand in those conversations with them. I think that's probably going to be the most helpful thing, and then having some advice on your end so that if they're asking certain questions or they want information about your business, you have someone to go back to on your side to say, is this normal or is this reasonable?
Thank you. So when should you have your business valued and who should complete the valuation?
Um, like I said, if somebody's calling you and they want to give you an offer, that's a great time to have your business valued because it will give you that benchmark to put against what they're offering you. But valuations can also be handy throughout the life of your business, especially if you're making big changes and you want to see how you're improving over the years. You definitely don't need one all the time, but if you've made a big change and you want to see how that growth has changed your business over, say, 2 or 3 years, have a valuation done and you can kind of see what that looks like. Have another one done in another few years, see where you're at. that could be really helpful if you're in that growth mindset, right? If you're wanting to really build your business to be ready for sale, then having those kind of periodic, every few years valuations can be helpful. As a general kind of rule, when you're planning to exit, you want to have one done at the start. And then if you're ready right away, you can use that valuation to go to market and sell, or you can use that valuation to build up the value a little bit and then sell in another 2 or 3 years or something.
So valuation, so I've made the decision to sell, valuation day one, and
More
then
or
work
less,
from
yes.
there. And then, so we do live in, shall we say, interesting economic times where we have, quite massive shocks working through different systems. What happens then if you were valued at $1 million day one? And by the time you've done all your prep work to be able to sell 2 years later, you've dropped to 700,000. Are there any guidelines for that? You just have to work harder to get back to a million? Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. And that can
Okay.
happen. So as you're getting ready, if you have your valuation at, say, $1 million, you'll have some detail on why it's worth that, right? Maybe your net income was, you know, 500,000 or something like that, but you'll have those benchmarks. And then if you have veered quite far off of those benchmarks, you'll know the value has changed and it might have gone down. We've seen that happen. And things like when COVID happened, valuations considerably dropped, right? Businesses weren't active anymore, and the valuations for those companies that weren't working went way down. So there's no, I guess, hard and fast rule for how you can protect it other than to keep running it the way that you are. And if something like a COVID or something happens, there's not much that you can do apart from building back up, which is why we're seeing a lot more sellers coming out of the woodwork now than we have in the past few years, because their values did drop. And then they spent those few years post-COVID building it back up.
I'm just curious, do you have a general idea if the valuations are pretty much pre-pandemic or are they still down, just high level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're far enough out of it that valuations are now back to either where they were or they're better or worse depending on the industry that you're in. I A lot of the times when we do evaluation, we look at the last 5 fiscal years and we'll average it out, and or we'll look at, how things have changed. And sometimes we'll pull those COVID years right out of there because they're not relevant anymore. And we can see in the last few years that those COVID years were a blip. They're not truly indicative of what the company does.
So there is hope then. There is there is hope. All right. And so you did talk about evaluators, and you did say that you could contact the IBBA, that's the International Business Brokers Association, to connect with those resources. Now we're at the halfway part of this wonderful conversation. And Jessica, we're going to flip things. So we've talked about sellers. Now we're going to talk about buyers.
All right.
So 2 to 5 year horizon to sell. What does it look like if you wanted to buy a company? What does that process look like?
It's going to be different for sure. The kind of 2 to 5 year horizon when you're building your business, you're in it every day. So you have that, you know, you're there working on those over the period of time. Whereas for a buyer, typically you're kind of, at least most of the buyers I work with, they sometimes have a full-time day job. They sometimes, you know, have just been looking for like a few months. It's not going to take, well, it might, but it's likely not going to be the same, all in kind of process. You're probably doing it on the side along with other things. And you can use different websites like IBBA Canada for one. We have listings on our site. Canada Businesses for Sale is another good one. And they will list business opportunities across the country. So you can see what might be coming available and you can look for things that are most attractive to you. But like I said, you probably wouldn't be, full-time looking for a business. You're just kind of doing it on the side most of the time.
So what should you be looking for? What are some green flags? What are some red flags when you've gone through these websites? You say, that's the business for me, I think. So what would you, you're like, you're not sure, but you want to. What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. It depends on how you're going about the acquisition. If you are someone that is looking to be an owner operator, then you want to find something that you are more passionate about. And personally, I think that's really important. I find a lot of buyers, they like to tell me that they're industry agnostic. They don't care what the business does. They just want it to have profit. I don't like to go about it that way because I don't think that there's going to be as much success there. I really think it's important to find something that you are interested in because you're going to be in it every day. If you're looking to be that owner operator, first of all, find something that you like to do. If you buy a coffee shop, but you really hate coffee, it's probably going to suck. So that's probably the first one. But then when you find that thing, maybe you love coffee and you found a coffee shop, then you want to look for the things that are like the profit over the last 5 years. Make sure that it's sustainable. Make sure that they have been able to keep that going, and then find out why, right? Do they have a lot of return customers? Do they offer a particular unique product that people really love? Getting into those types of questions will help you figure out whether that's the right business to buy.
Okay. I'm curious. So now you've identified a business, the financials look decent, you have a lawyer at your side, you've got an IBBA expert at your side. The actual mechanics of the actual buying, and if you have employees, culture is king.
Mhm.
If you culture will trump or destroy any company. So, are there any processes or are there any informal interviews that a buyer could have with the employees to see, are they at each other's throats? Do they play well with one another? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so this is a very tricky thing that you will go through in either the sale or the purchase of a business, because confidentiality is key. For the seller, most of all, the buyer not so much, but keeping your clients and your employees kind of out of the loop for the first part is really important, because deals can fall apart all the way through the process, all the way up until the end, they can fall apart. And if everyone is expecting you to sell, customers might get freaked out and go somewhere else. Employees might think that they don't have job security and leave. And then if the deal falls apart, then the seller is kind of left on the hook with a business that's now worth probably a lot less. So confidentiality is really important. And as a buyer, it's important to understand that in the business that you're looking into, right? Because you want as much information as you can possibly get, but it has to still maintain some of that confidentiality. So what I've seen in the past sometimes is that people will come in as a customer and they'll just go through, like if it is a coffee shop, go buy a coffee, sit there for a few hours. Don't say anything, obviously, because it's confidential, but go and see what it's like to be there. And obviously some businesses are easier to do that with than others. A coffee shop would be easy to do that with. But finding kind of workarounds like that where you can see what the culture is like and what the business is doing without necessarily informing customers or employees of what's going on.
Thank you. All right. So, how do you draft an appealing offer for a seller?
All sellers have different motivations, right? They're just people like we are all people, and finding the things that are important to them will help you draft a more compelling offer. Some sellers are mostly driven by price. So in that case, if you know that it's competitive and they are primarily driven by price, offer more. That will probably get you further along, right? If the seller is more motivated to have a very smooth and fast transition, show them how you can make it smooth and fast, right? Maybe you already have your cash, you don't need financing. Maybe you can do a short training and transition period because you have a lot of knowledge in that area. Those are the types of things that can make the offer more appealing. The purchase price is just one part of the offer. The other parts are the terms that the seller has to deal with over the period of time, right? So those are the things that you can kind of play on to make the offer more appealing. And once you get into the due diligence, you will be asking the seller to open up everything to you, right? You'll want to see all their financials, all their dirty history from the last few years. So being willing to share some of your history is really important, right? Make sure they know who you are, why you're putting in this offer, and why it's important for you to buy the business. And most of the sellers that I've worked with have really appreciated that.
Thank you. What is a vendor's note?
As I was saying, with the offers and the various terms, a vendor note is going to be one of those terms that you can kind of play on in the offer. So if you think about buying the business for, say, $1 million, and you have 200,000 to put in, you know you need an extra 800,000 to buy this company. Where are you going to get that money? Most likely from the bank. But if you can't get the full amount from the bank, you might be able to get some from the vendor. That's what a vendor note is. So it provides some financing for the purchase that is coming directly from the seller.
So if I want to wrap my non-finance head around that one. So let's say it's a sale of $1 million. I have 200 cash to put in the kitty. I need the 800,000 from the person I'm buying the company from. Is that correct?
Unless you can get it from the bank.
Sure, but for whatever reason I can't.
Yes, then yes.
And does that mean that I pay 100,000 a year for 8 years, whatever the terms we agree on? That's okay. All right.
The terms are dependent on each offer. So if a vendor note is something that you absolutely have to have, you want to make sure that that's appealing to the buyer. So you could give them a decent interest rate, right? Because the bank would charge interest, so that the seller should be able to charge interest as well. They're not giving you the business and the money for free necessarily, right? So you want to make it appealing for them. Make sure that your payment terms are reasonable and it's not drawn out too long, and they're getting interest over that period of time.
Okay, thank you. And then, so can you buy a business without a down payment?
You'll hear a lot of, there's like podcasts and books about it. These things where you're going out and buying businesses with zero down. It is possible, but it's typically harder to do. If you have some cash, you're going to be able to put down a better offer, right? You might need less of that vendor financing or those vendor notes, which can definitely be harder for sellers to accept. So having a down payment is very helpful. You can do it without, and depending on your financial position, you might be able to finance the whole deal anyway. So you won't necessarily need to put in that down payment, but you have it. And the bank is going to look for things like that.
Okay. And so I'm just going to slip in another word for we walk across Canada, $50,000 to buy or sell, well, to buy a business and start up our expansion. But what other financing mechanisms are there?
I thought that was built into it though.
Sorry about that. Okay.
The biggest one that most buyers will require is some sort of bank financing. And organizations like yours are great because they can offer a portion of the sale price, or depending on the size of the business, maybe the wholesale price. And then you don't need to go to the bank. But if you do need to go to the bank, BDC is a really good one for buying businesses because they do more lending on just the cash flow. If you go to a traditional bank, they also might be able to help, but they're going to be looking for more asset-heavy businesses. They're going to be willing to lend on things like property or large equipment, those sorts of things. If the business doesn't have that, it's going to be harder to get that traditional bank lending. So BDC is a good option. There are some other organizations across the country that will do loans, like I think Futurepreneur is one, where you can get a small loan to buy the company, similar to the one that you would offer, I would imagine. So there are other small resources like that, but for the most part, it's going to be between the bank and sometimes from the vendor.
Yeah. And just to be fair and transparent here, so WEOC is across Canada. Ontario is the mechanism, PARO is the mechanism from Ontario. It will do startups and expansions depending on the size of the company. Community Futures Development Corporations are county-based organizations across the country. They also have financing to purchase an existing business. You'd need to contact each individual one to see their terms and their particular area of focus. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And so I think that wraps up this beautiful conversation. If, with your permission, Jessica, we'll open it up to Q&A.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So thank you for that. Now you're welcome to type in the chat either a direct message to me. My name is Renée Gendron. It's just at the bottom of my screen. You can find me in the chat box, and or you can raise your hand, and then if you're brave to go on camera for that. Now I do have a very fast typer. I think she was anticipating the Q&A period, so I do have one. So here it is. What is, it's a two-parter here. So what is the general cost for a basic valuation? Is there a rule of thumb?
There isn't really, because there are so many different types of valuation. There are some firms that will do a valuation for free, so similar to like a real estate appraisal, but that won't give you all the details on how to improve the value. It'll likely just give you a number or even a range. Accounting firms, again, they might do it in a similar way, and you probably be looking at a few $1,000s for that. And then they go all the way up to, you know, $10,000 and up for something called a CBV, which is a chartered business valuator. Those are going to be more expensive. And those are really important if you're needing a valuation for like tax purposes or anything that's going to court. You will likely need that chartered business valuator appraisal. And then they kind of range anywhere in between that, depending on who you're talking to.
For the standard sale of any business, does it, and the valuation, so once everything's dotted and crossed, does that chartered business evaluator, must they always be there, or is that not always? Okay.
Typically, like for us, we do all our own valuations at our firm, and we wouldn't use a CBV. We have a financial analyst or a CFA, that sort of thing. They can do evaluation as well. And then typically it's a bit cheaper than that CBV valuation that you would need for court purposes.
Okay, wonderful. So to follow up here, we have a business that has back HST and payroll taxes owed from 2018 to 2020 on an incorporation, not a sole proprietor, but a corporation, due to a previous CEO. That business from 2020 to present is, however, current on its taxes. Um, and I'm just curious about that scenario. So back taxes owed, payment plan in place, but what does the health of that company tell you in trying to sell?
That's a tough question. Because typically when you transact, it's going to be cash free, debt free. That's what the buyer is going to want. So even though those are back taxes from a long time ago and maybe from someone else, they're most likely going to want those paid off out of the proceeds of the sale. Not necessarily always. You know, you might be able to find a buyer that would incorporate that into the value, maybe, you know, maybe it would drop the value a little bit, but they would take on that debt. Something like that could be the case. But typically they're going to want it cash free, debt free. The other thing that's important to note about that cash free, debt free sale is that there's something called working capital, and depending on the size of the company, that working capital can maybe take that debt into account. So most companies, have a certain amount of working capital that will transfer with it. And this is only for share sales. Asset sales would have no working capital because you're buying just the assets. But working capital would be all of your current assets minus your current liabilities. That's how you find out what that number is. And there needs to be a certain amount to transfer with the sale, so that those taxes, those back taxes, might be included in that calculation. But most likely they'll need to be paid up.
Thank you. All right. Brave soul sending me direct messages. So thank you for that. So we have a scenario in which someone wants to buy a business, but the bank can only pay or will only finance half. In that particular scenario, a vendor's note is not possible. It's just not being negotiated. Do we have any high-level supports or advice on finding an investor to go in for the other half? Does that happen?
It does. It does.
Okay.
I can't give you like specific places to go necessarily to find an investor. But there are, organizations that do kind of connect people. Women's Equity Lab is a female-run investment corporation. So there are places like that, but it really depends on the type of business, whether or not they would be interested. Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't like a really great network of investors, and there should be, where you can kind of go and put your idea out there and find somebody to invest. But that doesn't seem to be a thing quite yet. But the best thing to do is have a really good business plan so that you can show why someone should invest that money. And then when you find the right person to talk to, you can clearly explain the benefits to it, because basically you're asking them to put in all of this money with no guarantee on what's going to come out of it. So as much as you can show your business plan and how they're going to see a return on that investment, that's the best way to go about it. But finding people can be tricky. I think lots of organizations like PARO, those sorts of things, you probably have networking events and groups where you can find like-minded women, and that's probably a good place to look.
I'll just plug the program because it was just a nice lead into investors. PARO does have an investor ready program. So these are for established companies that have usually about 100,000 in revenue, and it walks you through the terminology. It walks you through positioning your company, like you've talked about, and getting your financials in order. And then it also literally gets you ready with your pitch, your presentation, your blurb. I'll just put it out here that many places have angel investment networks, women or men, it doesn't matter. They just have angel investors. They also have investor networks, right? There's angel money is very patient, very kind, very, let's all heart, less money. And then you've got your investors, your venture capitalists, different other networks on that level to be able to go after a little bit more aggressive money, in the sense that they want that ROI at the beginning of like day one. Depending on the scenario and depending on the investments, you can also do like a friends and family round of investing. Every friend and family member becomes a shareholder in the company. They put 5 or 10 grand in the kitty, and then you can raise the money like that. But go to a lawyer for that first. Do not come to me. Go to a lawyer for that first. Okay. So we have a question from Beth. There is a local business for sale, and the seller really wants to sell to me, and I want to buy this business since it's something that I'm educated in and passionate about. So green check mark, excellent. And now I don't have enough for a down payment through the bank, so I'm looking for different resources to make the deal happen. So what resources? Okay, the WEOC loan in Ontario, depending on how much you need, would be up to 50,000. If you're outside of Ontario, it's still eligible. You would just need to go through a different mechanism. Ask me afterwards, and I'm very happy to connect you. I'll just put my email here for everybody. Okay. And then again, PARO first as a point of contact, BDC that Jessica mentioned, Community Futures Development Corporations. If you own an asset like a house, you can actually use a line of credit against the house for your down payment and then play around with finances that way. Okay. Any other questions about buying or about selling? I'm curious if I can ask perhaps a question that Jessica can't. I'm just very curious now. On a dollar amount, what was the biggest deal that you signed, if you're allowed to say? I'm not sure if you're allowed.
Yeah, the biggest one that I've personally worked on, 6 million. But our firm works on deals. We specialize in, it's called the lower middle market, and that would be like $2 to $10 million range. But we've done up to 20. I think the largest was 80 million, but I wasn't involved in that one personally.
Wonderful. And just to give the audience an idea of the complexity of the contracts that you've been working on and the nuance and details and the kind of like opening up different books and stuff. So you really are a terrific wealth of information. And I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand and chat directly if you'd like, or you can send me another direct message and I'm very happy to read it out. This is being recorded, so if anybody would like to have the recording afterwards, again, my email is in the chat, just let me know. And that way we can go through the terrific information that Jessica shared with us today. For the people who are thinking of selling, are you still thinking of selling? And for the people who are thinking of buying, are you still interested and happy to buy? Or yes, Beth says yes, so that's great. So thank you, Beth. Love the enthusiasm. Okay. Well, I have it 3 minutes to the top of the hour. Oh, did I have somebody else? And yeah, perfect. So if someone still wants to sell, let's appreciate that. Okay. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you so much, Jessica, for your time, your wisdom, your insights. I'm very grateful. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was lovely. If anybody has questions or anything I can help out with, let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn or on the IBBA Canada website. Let me know. I'm happy to chat.
Wonderful. Can you actually just drop your LinkedIn in the chat in case anybody wants to connect?
I sure can. That's me.
That's you. Wonderful. So thank you, Sophia. Thank you everybody for being here. I will just stop the recording. So that's in the chat.